PHP's origin can be traced to 1994, where it was created from Perl, or Practical Extraction and Reporting Language scripts, and CGI, or Common Gateway Interface binaries, written by Rasmus Lerdorf. He collectively called these personal homepage tools. These scripts were officially released as PHP in 1995. The acronym has been modified since its original inception, where it stood for Personal Homepage, and now stands for PHP Hypertext Preprocessor. PHP is an embedded server scripting language like Microsoft's ASP or Active Server Pages, and as such, it executes through an interpreter application that runs on the server. However, PHP offers several key advantages over ASP. Namely, PHP code runs and executes faster than ASP code. PHP requires less code than ASP to do common tasks, like connecting to databases, and PHP is designed in a more object-oriented fashion, making projects more scalable and flexible. The current latest stable release of PHP at the time of this video's creation is PHP 5.4.0 and can be downloaded from www.php.net. Most modern programming languages start out as plain ASCII, or American Standard Code for Information Interchange, or Unicode text, and are then either compiled or interpreted. PHP is considered an interpreted language. An interpreted language stands in contrast to a compiled language in several distinct categories. Let's extrapolate these ideas a bit further and extrude their differences. If the language is a compiled language, then code typed in as ASCII text is converted through a process known as linking and compiling into binary machine code or intermediate byte code. An example of a language that compiles to machine code is C++. An example of a language that compiles to byte code and is then executed through a virtual machine is Java. One advantage of using a compiled language is that compiled code runs much faster than interpreted code, since there is no interpreter the code must pass through first. Essentially, this eliminates the middleman and allows the code to communicate more directly with the system and hardware. Another advantage is that code can be obfuscated or hidden and encrypted, making it more difficult to reverse engineer, bypass security algorithms, or decipher passwords. For this reason, many game engines and large complex applications are written in compiled languages like C++. A consequence of using a compiled language is that every time you modify the source code, you must then recompile the application and convert the modified code into new machine code or byte code. If a language is an interpreted language, then code typed in as ASCII or Unicode text is interpreted, just as it is, through an engine without any linking or compiling process. Examples of interpreted languages are HTML, JavaScript, VBScript, Perl, and of course, PHP. For example, HTML and JavaScript are coded as plain text and then interpreted through a web browser. In contrast, Java must be compiled first and can run without a web browser. The primary advantage of an interpreted language is that code can be easily changed and modified without the need to link and then recompile the code each time. For this reason, interpreted languages like PHP and JavaScript are excellent choices for creating dynamic, flexible, and constantly changing websites and online databases. PHP is a great tool for developing versatile and responsive online applications, even though that advantage comes at the expense of the speed and security offered by compiled languages. Getting started. Before being able to program and develop with PHP, you will need to provide yourself with a few prerequisites, namely a web server, the PHP interpreter engine, and some type of text editor. Let's examine the first prerequisite. To install and run the PHP interpreter engine, you will need a web browser. In Linux operating systems like Ubuntu and Fedora, that means the Apache 2 web server. It can be easily installed in Debian distributions like Ubuntu through Synaptics or by typing the command sudo apt-get install Apache 2. It can be easily installed on Red Hat systems like Fedora through Synaptics, RPM, or yum commands. I'm on Ubuntu, a Debian flavor of Linux, and we're just going to go to Accessories, Terminal, to open up a command prompt. And let me pull this out a little bit. Give us some more room, and we'll zoom in just a little bit, so hopefully you can see better. And maybe just one more there. Alright, and I just want to make sure that I've got a valid IP up here with ifconfig. So we have basic connectivity. Alright, we can ping Yahoo. And the command to install the Apache Web Server is just sudo to gain temporary root privileges. apt-get install Apache 2. And it'll go out, check the repositories, ask me if I want to install it, 10.1 meg, I'm going to say yes. It's going to download the packages and dependencies for Apache 2. Okay, now we're done. And once we do this, I'm going to go out to the root level. And if I list the directories, I'm going to go here into the variable var. And notice it created the directory www. And if I list the contents, there's my default location and my default web page there, index.html. I'm going to exit the command prompt here, and I'll show you what that looks like in Nautilus. If I hold down Alt and hit F2, that'll bring it run application. And I'm just going to use gksudo this time instead of sudo, since it's X Windows or graphical, and I'm going to run an instance of Nautilus. And requires a root password, but this will let me go and do things at the root level, cut, paste, move things around, whatever I want to do. And same thing here. If you're more used to Windows, I'm just doing this to show you what it would look like graphically. So a lot like Iis and how it does inetpub, and we're just going to test it by opening Firefox. And it defaults to Yahoo, and I'm going to go to File and uncheck Work Offline here. So we'll work online, and I'm just going to type in localhost, which is the loopback 127.0.0.1, or I could use the IP address, or I could use the host name of the machine. And if Apache 2 is installed properly, you'll see the web page here, index.html, which simply says it works. This is the default web page for this server, yada yada yada. In Windows operating systems like Windows 8, Windows 7, XP, Server 2008, or Server 2003, that usually means the Internet Information Services web server, since it's built in. Although there are versions of Apache which you can download and install in Windows. To install the Iis Web Server in Windows 7, click Start, Control Panel, Programs and Features, turn Windows features on or off, select Internet Information Services, and click OK. Remember that when you test and execute PHP applications, you cannot simply click on the web page that you see displayed in Linux's Nautilus or Windows's Explorer file browsers. If you do this, HTML and JavaScript will be interpreted and executed through the web browser, but the PHP code will not, since it is being loaded directly into the browser without being interpreted through the web server. Instead, you must open the browser and run each PHP encoded web page and script by typing http://localhost/ the name of the page with the .php extension. Of course, you may substitute the server's hostname or IP address for localhost. Now I'm on a Windows 7 machine, and if I want to use the built-in web server, Internet Information Services, or IIS, I can install it by clicking on Start, go into Control Panel. I then want to go into Programs and Features, and then turn Windows features on or off. And I can go down and select Internet Information Services. If I just check the box here, and there are several, subcomponents and things that you can install, the FTP server if you want to do FTP and so forth, but I'm just going to go with the default here for basic PHP development. And this is not the same as, the Internet Information Services web server in 2008 server, 2003 server is a lot more sophisticated and could handle a lot more requests than the IIS that you run out of, say, Windows 7, Windows 8, or XP. The one that you run on a Windows 7 or XP, it can't really handle a lot of connections, and it's just intended for development purposes. So it'll let you develop a PHP, it'll let you test your PHP applications and things, HTML, JavaScript, PHP, active server pages, ASP, whatever. But if you were going to put this into production, so to speak, a shopping cart or a guest book or some kind of PHP application, database, or game or something, you wouldn't really want to do it in Windows 7 or Windows 8. Of course, you'd want to use a server product. Or if you're using Linux, that's Apache, and that's another story which we'll cover in a moment. So I'm going to click on OK. And now we're done installing the Internet Information Services web server in Windows 7. Once you have your web server installed, you're going to want to test it. And notice one of the things that happened. If you look in the web directory, a directory was created called inetpub and www-root. And this is the default website directory, and if you load up your web server, it should display this web page, okay? So if I were to just open this in Firefox, alright, here I'm looking at it locally. If you see file, // so I'm not running it through the web server, but if things are working properly, that's what I should see. So again, I'm going to click home just to change the page, and now you could either type in your IP address, your computer's host name, or you could simply type localhost. And this way, the web page will be passing through or being served from the web server. And there's a difference. When you're writing your PHP code, and also if any kind of a scripting language that has to be interpreted through some kind of an engine or a web server, like active server pages, I'm thinking PHP, you're going to want to make sure that you run it through the web server and that you don't just click on the file and open it directly in the browser. All right, there's a difference. So in this example, I'm running it through the web server. And if my web server wasn't working properly, this would not be displayed. Okay? Now that's completely different from me clicking on the file. If I just clicked on this and I opened it up in Firefox, even if my web server was not running or not even installed, it would still display the web page because it's just loading it directly off of the hard drive on the local system. But it's not actually serving it through the web server. And so that's also going to be a problem with PHP. If you forget that, every now and then, sometimes you're in a hurry and you've got 10 windows open at once, you're multitasking, you're trying to meet a deadline or something, and you might accidentally open up a file in the web browser but without running it through the web server. And so if you notice that for some reason your PHP code is not being processed the way it should be, even though the web server is running and PHP is, take a look at the the address bar up here, the URL, and make sure that it's actually http:// localhost, hostname, IP address, whatever, that it's actually running through the web server and not that you're simply opening it up in a file. Let's examine the next prerequisite. After installing a web server, you need to install the PHP Engine. Note that when using the Apache web server, PHP can be installed under two basic strategies, as an Apache module or as a CGI interpreter. As always, there are advantages and disadvantages with both strategies. If PHP is compiled as an Apache module, it will run in the same memory space as the server. The advantage of this is that PHP code is interpreted faster. The disadvantage is that if the PHP process crashes, so does the web server. If PHP is configured as an interpreter, it does not execute code as quickly, but it will not crash the web server when something goes wrong with the PHP application. To install PHP on Ubuntu or Debian Linux systems, just use apt-get from a command prompt and then restart the Apache 2 web server. Here's an example. Sudo apt-get install PHP 5 and then sudo /etc/init.d/Apache 2 restart. Okay, now we're going to install the PHP interpreter engine and dependencies. Again, I'm going to go to accessories and terminal. And let me just drag this out a little bit so you can see. And we'll zoom in. Okay. And let's check from an IP. There's my IP. Basic connectivity. Okay. And I'm going to apt-get update. Oops, let me sudo that. Just to kind of update my repository list. And then we just want to use sudo apt-get install PHP 5 to go out and grab the PHP interpreter engine and dependencies. Okay. Updated. And again, sudo for temporary root privileges. Gotta get used to that. I use su just once in Red Hat, and well, you could do that in Ubuntu too, but you shouldn't, but I do. And install PHP 5. And it's about 9 meg. Ask me if I want to. I'll confirm yes. And it will go grab the package and its dependencies. Okay? And actually, in the installation process, it stops and restarts the web server. But it's recommended that after you do this, you also manually restart Apache, the Apache 2 web server. And to do that, it's just going to be sudo to get temporary root privileges, and then etc initd Apache 2 for the soft link, and pass it the command line argument of restart. And don't worry about the error message, it's just getting that because I haven't specified anything for a qualified domain name. Right now I'm just using my local host and the loopback 127001. So again, if you're testing on your Linux system, you may get a similar message, but don't worry, that won't affect anything as far as using the PHP interpreter engine. Alright, so we're done there. And now let's actually go test something. So once again, we're going to make a test file, and I'm going to do this the easy way. You could use nano, vim, vi editor, whatever. Easy way to do this is alt F2 gksudo to open it up with root privileges, and gedit, just a built-in text editor to GNOME and the Unity engine, whatever you might be using. Usually there's gedit in both Red Hat, Fedora, and Debian Linux, like Ubuntu. But alright, so I have a new text document here, and what I want to do is make some basic HTML tags. And now we're going to do title tags. Remember, that's not anything displayed on the page, but this is what displays in the tab of the web browser. So that'll be our page title. And then what actually displays is what we put inside of body tags. Okay. Here's my closing tag, here's my opening tag. And then in between there, I'm just, white space doesn't matter, but I'm adding it hopefully to make things easier to follow or see here. And some center tags, I'll just throw some text in there, drop down a line. On a really small keyboard today, it's bugging me, but my fingers are too big and fat. And anyway, alright, so BR, just add a couple of lines there. And then down here, we'll actually add our PHP code. And again, that's also in tags as well. And the tag would be a question mark, PHP, that's the opening tag, with the less than symbol, then the greater than symbol, and a question mark as the closing tag. And then any code that you type in between would be the actual PHP code. That's what gets interpreted. And we're just going to call a very simple function or method PHP info. And just like in Java and C++ and many other languages, the parentheses would hold arguments or parameters, in this case none, that's empty, and it would be terminated by a semicolon. So again, all this will be processed as normal HTML, but when the web server serves it out and gets to this, this is actually different. This isn't HTML, this is PHP code. So it's going to go call that or invoke that function and call it, and that'll just display some information about our PHP setup and let us know if PHP is actually working. Alright, so where we want to save this is the only directory right now where we have default permissions. So I need to go browse to another folder, and this is why I had to use gksudo and open this as root privileges. Otherwise, when I tried to save it, it would deny me the privilege of saving it in this directory. I'd be limited to my home directory. And what I want to call it is test. Let's call it test.php. I'm going to give it the PHP extension, and I'm going to click save. Okay. And notice how cool gedit is. When I did that, it actually color-coded it. So you can select the HTML tags in blue and the PHP tags in red. Alright, so that being saved now, I can close it. And to test it out, again, if I were to browse to that directory, I didn't open this up with gksudo or root privileges, so I wouldn't be able to cut, paste, save, modify, rename anything, but I can simply browse, even without using gksudo. So there it is, right in that folder, var www, there's test.php. So we'll open up Firefox to test it out. And I'm going to go to File. And again, I'm going to untick Work Offline. You probably won't have to do that, but those are my security options here. And I just want to go and first we'll load the default page again, localhost. Right, that's in this case set to index.html. Although you can modify that in the etc folder under default sites, the default site settings and things. But what I want to do is /test.php or whatever you called the page, right? So see how that works? http://. This would either be your computer's host name, your IP address, the loopback 127.0.0.1 or localhost, and then / and then the file name, which we called, remember, test.php. There it is in Nautilus. And I'm going to hit enter. And there we go. So now we know that, in addition to the HTML, our PHP code is working. Our interpreter engine is functioning now. And those are the results of calling the PHP info function or method. Now again, contrast that if I open that through the web server, then the PHP interpreter is running. But watch what happens if I just click on the file to open it. And let's see, open with other application. Let's open that with Firefox. Just like in Windows. Okay. And notice that, that's not what we want. So just remember, you have to, when you're working with PHP code, it has to pass through the PHP interpreter engine. So you've got to do http:// and then localhost, and then the file name, and that way it would be interpreted code. To install PHP on Windows systems, download the compiled executables. Go to www.php.net and visit the Download section. There, grab the latest PHP build for Windows, currently located at http:// windows.php.net/download. Once downloaded, run the install routine. The next thing we need to do is download the PHP interpreter engine for Windows Internet Information Services, or Iis Web Server. And to do that, we're going to go to the www.php.net website. See where we are right here. I'm going to go to the Downloads link up here. And then I'm going to go to Windows Binaries and click here. So now we're at windows.php.net/download. And you have several options here. It depends on what you're using. If you're using Internet Information Services, you're going to want to download the VC9 version, one of the VC9 versions. And notice they tell you here, if you're using Apache 1 or 2, you're going to want to download the VC6 version. Also, there are non-thread safe and thread safe versions. Okay, here's the way this works. Non-thread safe will be faster and give you more performance. Thread safe versions will be slower, but they will be more stable or more compatible. And the reason is that a lot of PHP modules are simply designed to work on Linux and Unix systems, which are multi-process systems, instead of Windows systems, which are multi-threaded systems. And so because of this, if you run PHP in a multi-threaded mode on Windows, you're going to get better performance. It's going to be faster, but it may also occasionally crash or become unstable depending on what modules that you use with it. Notice that they've got the non-thread safe up here at the top, so they're kind of putting priority or emphasis on performance over stability. But if you are concerned about stability, you'd want thread safe. If you're concerned about performance, you want non-thread safe. Although PHP 5.4.0 is the latest version, it's only available right now at this time in a zip file and a debug pack. So the easiest thing to do is to grab PHP 5.3 with the installer package. And I'm going to click and select Save File. Okay, and now that I've got it, one of the things we'll want to do before installing PHP is enable a dependency that's necessary to give sort of a performance boost to PHP. And what this will do, we're going to enable fast CGI by enabling the CGI option with the web server. That'll allow PHP to reuse PHP processes instead of having to shut them down, kill them, and then respawn them every time there's a PHP request. So to do that, we want to go into Programs and Features and into Turn Windows Features On or Off. and Internet Information Services, and World Wide Web Services, and Application Development Features. And you just want to make sure that you tick the CGI option. Alright, so I tick the CGI option. I'm going to click on OK. Now we're ready to install our installer file. I'm just going to double click the MSI file and confirm it with user account control. I'll select Next, check I accept the terms of the license agreement. I'll go with the default here. This is a 32-bit version of Windows 7. The previous version was a 64-bit, but you can see the file path as a default. Notice your options. Internet Information Services Fast CGI, Other CGI, or Do Not Set Up a Web Server. I'm going to choose Iis Fast CGI and click Next. Once I do this, this screen will appear. I'm just going to go with the default options, but notice if you wanted to, you can install lots of different extensions to make it work with databases and SQL and Oracle technology, things like that. But we're just going to go with the basic default installation here, and I'm going to go ahead and select Next and install, and let the automatic installation routine do all the work. And now installation has completed. The next thing we want to do is test everything and make sure it works. We tested our web server, but now we want to test the PHP interpreter engine. So I'm once again going to go into my C drive, inet pub, and www root. Remember, there was the default HTML page that Iis installed we used to test. We're going to make a new page. So I'm just going to right click and select text document. And I'm going to call this test. And normally the extension would be HTML or HTML if it were a plain old HTML page. But we're going to make it a PHP file, which is like an HTML page, but it'll be processed and interpreted through the PHP engine. We're going to use some very basic PHP, and I always use text editor. You don't really want to use like Word or anything fancy here because it'll add extra formatting into the text file, which will confuse the web server and also the PHP engine. So make sure you use a plain text editor, one designed for programming, or just something simple like Notepad or gedit if you're in Linux. So it doesn't add any weird, formatting characters and things that would confuse. So anyway, we're going to do some basic HTML, and probably many of you already know HTML, so we don't need to go over it. But if you don't, at some point in the next few videos, we'll do an HTML refresher. HTML is a very simple language. It's pretty easy to learn. You can pick it up in no time at all. The syntax is very simple. Everything has an open and closing tag. Closing tags have a / like this, and the tags themselves are delineated with a less than and greater than symbol. Alright, so this basically says this is an HTML document between the open and closing HTML. The next part of the document would be the header, which we'd have between open and closing header tags. Okay? And in the header tags would be the page's title. Not what appears on the web page itself that you look at in the browser, but what would appear in the tab above it or in the taskbar below it, depending on what kind of browser you're using. So we're just going to call this test PHP engine. All right, that will become the title tag. Now, I need to put this inside title tags that would go inside the head tags. And again, you guessed it, they just go like this. And it's not a case-sensitive language like Java, C++, JavaScript. But I just like to do my tags in capital letters. Makes it easy to see. And I don't know, maybe I'll rearrange this. The white space doesn't matter, but maybe it makes it a little easier to follow if I rearrange things somewhat. So look there, you can see what's between the head tags. Alright. And now I'm going to add the body tags. Now in between the body tags, this is what actually displays on the web page. And you can put things in the body tags like the default text color, the default background color, whatever, but we won't get that fancy yet. And I'm just going to add a center tag. Drop down, add a closing center tag. So everything typed between these tags would be centered in the middle of the page. I'm going to add a font tag just to allow me to specify the font. And I'm just going to specify the face here. Comic Sans MS, and the size. We'll set it to a fairly large font, maybe 7. And I'm going to come down here and close my font tag. Again with a /. And I'm just going to display testing the PHP interpreter engine. There, PHP interpreter engine. All right, exclamation point. Woohoo! All right, now none of this is PHP. This is all just straight HTML. So now we're going to do our first little bit of PHP code. And to do that, I'm just going to add a carriage return here, or actually two of them. That's carriage return or line feed, BR. I'm going to drop a line here, drop a line down, and then inside the center tag, I'm going to actually add the PHP code. And this is another set of tags. All your PHP code will go inside of tags, and in this case, it's going to be the less than symbol and a question mark and lowercase PHP. That will open or declare that all the code between this and the closing tag, which is a question mark and a greater than symbol, to be PHP code. So anything we type here, blah, 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 that's all PHP code. And the server will know that because of this opening tag here and this closing tag here. And what you're going to find is as you develop things like shopping carts and databases and chat rooms and guest books and whatever you're going to do with PHP games, you're going to intermittently go back and forth between scripting things in HTML and JavaScript, which are client side, and then PHP code, which is server side. So you might see, more than a dozen times in a PHP page, the programmer, the developer, will be switching back and forth between HTML, JavaScript, PHP, more HTML, more PHP. But the way that the server tells the difference is it knows because the code's typed between these tags here. All right, we're going to call a very simple function, just PHP info. And the syntax is, oops, left off my P there, PHP info. But the syntax is very much like C++ or Java or JavaScript in the sense that a function call has parentheses with arguments or parameters. In this case, there are none, so it's just empty parentheses. And it's terminated with a semicolon. So if you know those languages, you'll probably pick up PHP very fast. All right, so that way the server knows to interpret this through the PHP engine, just that little bit of code there, that function call. And the rest of it's just plain old, vanilla HTML. So we're going to save the page, and now we're just going to run it through the web server. And again, remember to test it. We don't want to, it's tempting sometimes, but you don't want to click on it and just try to open that in a web browser. If I did, watch what happens. Let me do this. I'm going to choose a default program. I'm not really going to change a default, but let me just choose a web browser here. All right, if I look at this in Firefox without going through the web server, look what happens. All it processes is the HTML. And that's because look at my path here. It's just a local file from the system. Now on the other hand, I'll close Firefox. I didn't have to, but let me open Firefox. All right, go to my home page. And now this time http://, and I'm going to type in localhost. So now I'm actually viewing things through the web server and not just opening them locally from my file system. And what I want to do is, remember the name of our page, test.php? That's what I want to process or interpret through the web server. So I'm just going to type test.php. When I do this, notice that here's the HTML that we typed in, but this is the actual PHP code. It's calling that function PHP info. And so now we can tell that our PHP is working, our interpreter engine's working, our web server's working, everything's ready. Now we're ready to start writing super fun, cool applications with PHP. Moving on to the last prerequisite, after installing a web server in the PHP engine, get yourself a good text editor. You can use simple text editors like GNOME's gedit for Linux, Ubuntu, or Red Hat Fedora. You can download more sophisticated free editors like Context or Cite. You can utilize an IDE or integrated development environment like the amazing and free NetBeans, available for download from www.netbeans.org. You can use non-free web development tools like Dreamweaver and FrontPage. Google these and find what works best for you. My personal favorite is, of course, NetBeans, and best of all, it's open source and free.